Mikal Mahdi spent 20 years on death row before South Carolina executed him by firing squad in April 2025. This is the story of Mikal Mahdi's botched execution, his trial that lasted less than a TV episode, his last meal, and the impossible choice between 3 ways to die. Before we continue, hit that like button and subscribe to be part of our growing community. Now, let's dive into one of the most disturbing death penalty cases in modern American history. The child who never had a chance. Mikal Deen Mahdi was born on March 20, 1983, in rural Virginia. From the moment he entered this world, the odds were stacked against him. His father, Sharif, was a former Marine with untreated schizophrenia and a violent temper. His mother was just 16 years old when she was forced into an arranged marriage with a man 11 years her senior. Imagine being 4 years old and watching your father slam your mother through a glass coffee table. Picture begging him to stop as blood pools on the floor. This wasn't a one-time incident. This was Mikal's childhood, day after day, year after year, violence, screaming, terror. Then one day, his mother was gone. She fled the abuse when Mikal was 4, leaving him and his older brother Salim alone with the man who was spiraling into madness. Sharif told the boys their mother didn't love them. Later, he told them she was dead. For years, Mikal believed he would never see her again. Without their mother's protection, the boys became their father's new targets. But the abuse wasn't just physical, it was psychological torture. By the time Mikal reached 2nd grade, he was already having suicidal thoughts. A 7-year-old child contemplating death. Let that sink in. By age 9, Mikal couldn't read. He was severely depressed, withdrawn, and desperate for help. His 5th grade teacher, Carol Wilson, saw something in him, a quiet, affectionate, creative boy who was drowning. She tried to intervene. She tried to get him the mental health treatment he so desperately needed. But Sharif refused. Instead of allowing his son to receive care, he pulled Mikal out of school entirely. What came next was even more disturbing. Homeschooling that consisted of conspiracy-laden rants and survivalist training in the woods. While other kids were learning math and science, Mikal was being indoctrinated into his father's paranoid delusions, preparing for an imaginary apocalypse. His family failed him, and at 14 years old, after committing property crimes, not violent crimes, just desperate acts of survival, Mikal Mahdi entered the Virginia juvenile prison system. This is where the real horror began. 8,000 hours in hell, the neuroscience of destroying a child. Here's what most people don't understand about solitary confinement. It's not just punishment. It's torture. And when you inflict it on a child whose brain is still developing, you're not just punishing bad behavior, you're permanently altering who that person will become. Between the ages of 14 and 21, Mikal Mahdi spent 8,000 hours in solitary confinement. Let me put that in perspective. That's more than 333 days, nearly a full year of his young life, locked alone in a concrete cell, with no human contact, no sunlight, no stimulation. Just walls, silence, and his own traumatized mind eating itself alive. But it gets worse. During one stretch at Wallens Ridge State Prison, a supermax facility in Virginia, notorious for human rights abuses, brutality, and racism, Mikal spent 1,700 consecutive hours in isolation. That's more than 2 months without seeing another human being. Another stretch lasted 500 consecutive hours, 3 full weeks. And why was he being tortured like this? For refusing to tuck in his shirt, for swearing, for refusing a haircut, for tearing pages out of a book. These weren't violent outbursts. These were the actions of a depressed, traumatized teenager crying out for help. The science is clear. Placing children in solitary confinement causes permanent cognitive and behavioral impairment. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, isolation irreversibly changes neural pathways and neurochemistry, altering areas of the brain responsible for regulating emotions and memory. We're talking about actual, physical brain damage. Think about it. Your brain doesn't finish developing until your mid-20s. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that controls impulse control, decision-making and emotional regulation, is the last to mature. Mikal spent the most critical years of his brain development in conditions that neuroscientists now compare to torture. He didn't receive therapy. He didn't receive medication for his depression. He didn't receive educational programs or rehabilitation. Instead, Virginia corrections officers tased him. They shot him with rubber bullets. They subjected him to racial slurs. They threw him into a hole and left him to rot. By age 16, Mikal tried to electrocute himself. He was placed on suicide watch. Records show he expressed suicidal ideation repeatedly throughout his teenage years. Between ages 14 and 21, Mikal spent 86% of his life, 86%, in juvenile and adult prison facilities. When he was finally released from Wallens Ridge in 2004, at age 21, he walked out with worsening mental illness, deep unhealed trauma, and no support system whatsoever. 2 months later, Mikal Mahdi committed the murders that would put him on death row. Do you see the connection? Can you honestly say this young man had a chance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear what you think about this. The crime, July 2004. I want to be very clear. What Mikal Mahdi did in July 2004 was horrific and inexcusable. 2 innocent people lost their lives. Families were destroyed. Nothing can undo that pain. But to understand this case, we have to look at what happened. It was mid-July 2004. Mikal, now 21, had been out of prison for only 2 months. On July 14th, he stole a gun and a car in Virginia. The next day, in Winston-Salem North Carolina, he walked into a convenience store and fatally shot 29-year-old clerk Christopher Jason Boggs in the face while Boggs was checking his ID. 2 days later, on July 17th, Mikal was in South Carolina. He carjacked a man in Columbia, then fled to Calhoun County, where he ended up at a rural farm belonging to 56-year-old Captain James Myers, an off-duty officer with the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety. Myers had just returned from celebrating his wife's, sister's, and daughter's birthdays. He was in his work shed when Mikal ambushed him. Mikal shot Captain Myers 9 times, then doused his body in gasoline and set it on fire before stealing his unmarked police vehicle. A massive manhunt ensued. 3 days later, authorities captured Mikal in Florida. The crimes were brutal, senseless, devastating. Captain Myers' family had to live with unimaginable loss. Christopher Boggs' loved ones had to bury a 29-year-old son, brother, friend. There's no minimizing that pain. But here's the question that should haunt us. Could this have been prevented? The prosecutors would later argue that the nature of the man is violence, but was violence his nature? The trial that never was. After his arrest, Mikal Mahdi pleaded guilty to the murder of Captain James Myers. Because he pleaded guilty, there was no jury trial. This is where the case becomes even more disturbing. At the sentencing hearing in December 2006, prosecutors called 28 witnesses. They painted a picture of a remorseless killer who deserved to die. They were thorough. They were prepared. They made their case over hours of testimony. The defense? They called 2 witnesses, their entire case for why Mikal Mahdi should be spared the death penalty, why he should receive life in prison instead of execution, lasted less than 30 minutes. Let me repeat that. Less than 30 minutes. Mikal's lawyers later described the defense as lasting shorter than a Law & Order episode. Think about that. In the time it takes to watch a single TV drama, a man's life was reduced to a few bullet points and 2 witnesses. The defense never called his elementary school teachers, who remembered him as a quiet, affectionate, thoughtful, and creative child. They never called mental health experts to explain the devastating impact of 8,000 hours of solitary confinement on a developing brain. They never called witnesses to detail his father's schizophrenia, his mother's abandonment, or the years of abuse that left him suicidal at age 7. Why? Mikal's family was uncooperative. They were shocked, angry, embarrassed by his crimes. his trial lawyers failed to seek out alternative witnesses who could have provided crucial context about his traumatic childhood. In essence, Judge Newman sentenced Mikal Mahdi to death without knowing the full story. He didn't hear about the 8,000 hours. He didn't hear about Sharif's violent rampages, or the conspiracy theories, or the survivalist training. He didn't hear about the suicide attempts, or the racial slurs, or the rubber bullets, or the tasing. All Judge Newman knew was the horror of the crimes, and based on that limited information, he made a decision. In his sentencing remarks, Judge Newman said he always tried to find a sense of humanity in every defendant who stood before him. But in Mikal's case, he said, that sense of humanity seems not to exist. Years later, Judge Newman, who presided over the Alex Murdaugh trial and other high-profile cases, admitted that the Mahdi case took a toll on him. He later revealed he didn't personally agree with the death penalty and that Mikal's sentencing was difficult for him. But by then, it was too late. Was justice served, or was a broken child sentenced to death by a system that never gave him a fair chance? Let me know what you think in the comments. Death row, 2 decades waiting to die. Mikal Mahdi spent 20 years on South Carolina's death row. For 2 decades he lived with the knowledge that the state intended to kill him. Every day he woke up knowing it could be his last. But something unexpected happened during those years. Mikal changed. He became an avid reader. He developed a deep interest in history. His lawyers described him as intellectually curious and thoughtful, a far cry from the angry, traumatized 21-year-old who had committed those terrible crimes. Carol Wilson, his 5th-grade teacher, said in a statement, "I know there's good in him. I saw it when he was a boy. If Mikal is allowed to live, I truly believe he can and will become a better person." He expressed deep remorse for his actions. He accepted responsibility for what he had done. In his final days, Mikal sought a measure of peace and purpose. He wanted to donate his organs and tissue to save other lives. But the state denied his request. In 2009, however, Mikal was involved in another violent incident. He and another inmate stabbed a prison guard, Nathan Sasser, during a failed escape attempt. Sasser survived, but later said the trauma from that attack still affected his ability to work, socialize, and enjoy life. Prosecutors pointed to this incident, along with other threats and attacks on prison staff, as evidence that Mikal remained dangerous. "The nature of the man is violence," they wrote in court papers. But Mikal's lawyers argued this was exactly the point. The system had damaged him so profoundly as a teenager that he never learned how to cope, how to process trauma, how to function. In March 2025, Mikal's legal team filed a final appeal with the South Carolina Supreme Court. They presented new evidence, advances in neuroscience showing the long-term effects of solitary confinement on juveniles, research on childhood trauma, and expert testimony about brain development. Several defense lawyer organizations filed briefs arguing that no one should be executed after such an inadequate defense at trial. The court denied the appeal. On April 11, 2025, Mikal Mahdi was scheduled for execution. But first, he had to make an impossible choice. The impossible choice: 3 ways to die. Under South Carolina law, Mikal Mahdi had to choose how he would die. He had 3 options: lethal injection, electrocution, or firing squad. Think about that for a moment. The state was asking him to decide which method of execution he preferred. It's a choice no human being should ever have to make. As his lawyer David Weiss put it, Mikal was faced with barbaric and inhumane choices. Lethal injection seemed like the most humane option, but it's plagued with problems. Executions have gone horribly wrong across the country, with prisoners gasping for air, writhing in pain and taking hours to die. Witnesses have described it as watching someone drown from the inside. The electric chair? Even worse. South Carolina's electric chair, nicknamed Old Sparky, has a notorious history. Prisoners have caught on fire. Skin has melted. The smell of burning flesh has filled the execution chamber. It's not a quick death. It's being burned alive from the inside out. That left the firing squad. South Carolina resumed use of the firing squad in 2021 after a 13-year pause in executions. The state couldn't obtain the drugs needed for lethal injection, so legislators brought back an execution method that hadn't been used in modern America in 15 years. Just weeks before Mikal's execution, on March 7, 2025, another death row inmate named Brad Sigmon became the first person shot to death by the state's firing squad. He died in less than 3 minutes. On March 28, with the deadline looming, Mikal Mahdi made his choice: firing squad. Mikal Mahdi has chosen the lesser of three evils, Weiss said in a statement. Would you be able to choose how you die? What would you pick? It's an unimaginable decision. Share your thoughts below. April 11, 2025, when the execution went wrong. April 11, 2025, Broad River Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. Outside the prison gates, about 25 protesters gathered, holding signs and candles. They prayed for Mikal. They prayed for his victims. They prayed for an end to the death penalty. Inside, in the death chamber, Mikal Mahdi had just finished his last meal, a medium-cooked ribeye steak, mushroom risotto, broccoli, collard greens, cheesecake and sweet tea. It was an upscale meal, a final taste of comfort and normalcy before the end. Mikal, now 42 years old, was strapped into the firing squad chair. A white cloth target with a red bullseye was placed over his heart. He made no movement to look at the witness room, where an unnamed member of Captain Meyer's family sat alongside the Calhoun County Sheriff, a representative from the solicitor's office, and one of Mikal's lawyers. Unlike other men executed in South Carolina that year, Mikal gave no final statement. There were no last words, no final message to the world, just silence. A hood was placed over his head at 6:01 p.m. A prison guard crossed the room and pulled up a shade, revealing 3 cubby-like holes in the wall. Behind those holes, 3 South Carolina Department of Corrections employees, whose identities were protected by a secrecy law, aimed their rifles. 30 seconds later, they fired. The bullets pushed the target into Mikal's chest. Witnesses saw little blood on his black jumpsuit at first, but then they heard something that would haunt them, a loud groan as the bullets struck. Mikal let out several shallow breaths. About 45 seconds later, he groaned again, softer this time. Then a low moan. He gasped for air for approximately 80 seconds. At 6:05 p.m., 4 minutes after the hood was placed on his head, Mikal Mahdi was declared dead. It should have been instantaneous. The South Carolina Supreme Court had ruled that death by firing squad would cause pain for only 10 to 15 seconds unless there was a massive botch of the execution in which each member of the firing squad simply misses the inmate's heart. But weeks later, the autopsy report revealed something shocking. A massive botch is exactly what happened. The botched execution, they missed his heart. On May 8, 2025, Mikal's lawyers released the state pathology report to the public. What it revealed was disturbing and raised serious questions about South Carolina's use of the firing squad. The autopsy showed only 2 bullet wounds on Mikal's chest, not 3. And critically, neither bullet hit his heart directly as intended. Instead, the bullets struck just above his abdomen, causing damage to his liver and other internal organs while allowing his heart to keep beating. According to pathologists, these injuries likely caused Mikal to suffer excruciating conscious pain for 30 to 60 seconds after he was shot, far longer than the 10 to 15 seconds the state Supreme Court had promised. But the questions didn't stop there. The state claimed all 3 shooters fired and all 3 bullets struck Mikal. They said 2 bullets traveled through the same wound, which would explain why the autopsy showed only 2 entry points instead of 3. Independent pathologists expressed serious doubt. Dr. Wigren, who reviewed the report, said the odds of 2 bullets going through precisely the same small hole are pretty minuscule. So what really happened? Did one shooter fail to fire? Did a gun jam? Did they simply miss? We may never know because South Carolina's secrecy law prevents anyone from knowing the identities of the firing squad members or the details of what went wrong. Perhaps even more troubling was the lack of documentation. When Brad Sigmon was executed by firing squad just weeks earlier, his autopsy included over 20 photographs, X-rays, external images, internal images, and even a clothing analysis. It was thoroughly documented. But Mikal's autopsy? His lawyers received just one photograph of his torso showing the 2 bullet wounds. No X-rays, no additional imagery, no clothing analysis. As of now, no investigation has been opened. Mikal Mahdi's botched execution remains one more dark chapter in the troubled history of capital punishment in America. Do you think the state owes answers to the public? Should we know what went wrong? Let me know in the comments. The victims, 2 families forever changed. In all of this, we cannot forget the real victims, Christopher Jason Boggs and Captain James Myers. Christopher Boggs was 29 years old. He was working as a convenience store clerk in Winston-Salem when Mikal Mahdi walked in and shot him in the face. He had a family. He had friends. He had a future. All of that was stolen in an instant. Captain James Myers was 56 years old. He had dedicated his life to public service as a member of the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety. He had just celebrated his wife's, sister's, and daughter's birthdays. He was at his own farm, in his own shed, when Mikal ambushed and murdered him in cold blood. These men didn't deserve to die. Their families didn't deserve this pain. No amount of trauma in Mikal Mahdi's childhood excuses what he did to them. Their lives mattered. Their stories mattered, and they should be remembered. An unnamed member of Captain Myers' family sat in the witness room during the execution. They watched as the man who murdered their loved one took his final breaths. Did it bring them peace? Did it bring closure? Only they can answer that. Mikal Mahdi's story is a tragedy from beginning to end. A child born into violence, abandoned by his mother, abused by his father, failed by teachers, social workers, and the justice system, tortured for years in solitary confinement during the most critical period of brain development, then released into society with no support, no treatment, no hope, only to commit horrific crimes 2 months later. Was he born evil? Or was evil done to him until it became all he knew? 26 inmates remain on South Carolina's death row. Each has a story, and each will face the same impossible choice Mikal Mahdi faced. How do you want to die? What do you think? Should Mikal Mahdi have been executed? Could his crimes have been prevented if he'd received help as a child? Is the death penalty justice, or is it revenge? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I want to hear your perspective on this case. And if this story made you think, please hit that like button and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.